Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
If you like weird, spooky, and strange history, then I have the podcast for you. My name is Brenda, and I'm the host of Horrifying History. Are you into the dark side of history? Horrifying History tells you about the side of history that people don't normally talk about. We tell the tales of haunted places, infamous true crimes, the paranormal, and unsolved mysteries, and then we look to history to see where the truth actually lies. Want to get spooky with us? Get your Horrifying History fix by subscribing today on Spotify, Spreaker, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders Midweek. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Hey Dylan, how's it going?
It's going great.
Great.
Just
like Tony the Tiger.
That's what Tony used to say.
We had a lovely stroll.
It was a lovely fall stroll.
Yeah, so beautiful out. All the colors.
It's almost a perfect temperature today.
It is.
Yeah, a little breezy.
We're talking about the weather.
Yeah, we are talking about the weather.
We're really boring.
You get a nice crunch of the leaves underfoot. I think that already makes it hit home for me that it is indeed fall.
Are you ready to do your fall photo shoot, Dylan?
I am. I just need some very large pumpkins to hold in front of me.
You do, and your tall brown boots.
And my tall brown boots.
That you can tuck your jeans into.
Of course.
You think we're kidding, but we're having a fall photo shoot for you this weekend, Dylan.
I will be there with bells on.
Oh, with bells. That's more like a holiday, like a Christmas photo shoot.
Well, I can wear bells anytime I want to.
Oh, you can?
Yeah. Maybe I want to jingle my way into your heart.
Please don't.
Yeah. So what do you have for us right now, Miss Heather?
We are going to talk about some murder houses, Dylan.
Killer houses, y'all.
Now, in our first murder house episode, we discussed the LaLaurie Mansion, New Orleans, and also the apartment in Chicago where Richard Speck killed nurses.
Richard Speck, what a monster.
You know, Dylan, we actually had a message from one of our listeners whose family lived in that neighborhood.
Really?
And I believe it was her aunt remembers Speck when he lived with his sister, like roaming around the neighborhood.
So she'd seen Speck roaming around being creepy.
So she says this is like my family's connection to true crime.
Well, that's a pretty big one.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
I thought we could talk about the murder of John Lennon.
I've always thought this was a very strange situation or strangeness that surrounded Lennon's death.
Well, it's a pretty famous spot in New York City. A lot of folks will go to the Dakota and take photos. So let's talk about this. Happened in 1980 at First West 72nd Street in New York, New York. On December 8th of 1980, a mentally ill 25-year-old man from Hawaii walked into a bookstore in New York City and bought a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. I don't know what it is about these very unhinged people, but they love The Catcher in the Rye.
You know, I don't think I've actually ever read that book.
It's a great book.
Really?
And I do like and appreciate Holden Caulfield's character. He's very antisocial, rails against the system. He's basically everything we are, Dylan.
Okay.
Right? So then that worries me. Like, I understand Holden. Does that make me a psychopath?
So you think the character that he outlines in that book is kind of speaks out to some people?
He does.
Who possibly are living a similar life?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, Holden's whole thing is kind of exposing the phoniness and hypocrisy. He's got the very antisocial personality traits.
I must say the world's chock full of that nowadays.
Right. So he buys a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. He had read the book previously and was obsessed with it. He wrote, "This is my statement," inside the front cover, and then put Holden Caulfield below that as if it were his signature. But it was not. His real name was Mark David Chapman. Chapman then walked over to a large co-op apartment building named the Dakota. The Dakota was one of the most expensive and well-known co-ops in New York City. It faced Central Park and units, and it cost millions of dollars.
That when I hear the term co-op, I think, you know, everyone working together, maybe not so much for profit, and everyone benefiting from it. So it seems like a co-op with $1 million units in it kind of It kind of goes against the term co-op, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think the idea of a cooperative apartment is the same. I don't think it's what you're thinking, Dylan.
Oh, like some 5 hippies running like a little fruit stand.
That's, yeah, like a food co-op.
Yeah.
It's not the same as like a cooperative apartment.
I would prefer to live in an uncooperative apartment. You know, you keep getting accidentally locked out. Nothing works right.
So the whole concept of cooperative housing, Dylan, I'm going to explain this to you. Let me see if your little brain can understand it.
I'm going to try.
It's a residential housing option that is actually a corporation whereby the owners do not own their units outright.
Okay.
Instead, each resident is a shareholder in the corporation based in part on the relative size of the unit they live in.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So it's not what you're thinking of like a hippie food co-op where you go work 6 hours and you get to leave with a box of squash. That's not what we're talking about. I appreciate your crunchy enthusiasm.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Yes.
Because that would have bothered me the
Now,
entire time.
as I mentioned, the Dakota is very expensive, costs millions of dollars, and it housed some of New York City's richest and most famous residents at the time. Chapman lingered near the front entrance of the Dakota. Along with the copy of The Catcher in the Rye, he had another item, and that was an LP record, Double Fantasy. John Lennon and Yoko Ono owned 5 apartments in the Dakota and lived there with their young son. Lennon actually walked past Chapman into the building at one point when Chapman did not see him. A little later, the housekeeper took Sean, Ono, and John Lennon's son for a walk, and Chapman recognized the child as being John Lennon's child.
Oh, my gosh.
He approached the two and tried shaking the young boy's hand. In the early evening, Lennon and Ono walked out on the front door. They walked out of the front door of the Dakota, and as they walked toward a limo, Chapman approached Lennon and asked if he would autograph the record he had brought. Lennon obliged. A photographer on the street caught the moment on film, John Lennon signing the album cover with Chapman looking on. John Lennon and Ono then left. Chapman stayed lurking near the entrance of the building.
So it's not at all weird for a grown man to approach you and try to shake a small child's hand, right? I'm just happy to meet you. I'm a big fan of your father's.
I'm very happy to meet you. Yes.
No, and back then, stars, huge stars, I mean, at that point, Lennon was an icon, obviously. They were much more accessible by the public. You know what I mean? They didn't always move with full entourages or, security teams.
Right.
Yeah, and you really could just wait around until you happen to see your huge star, your huge idol, and approach them.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if this incident kind of changed the way celebrities thought about security.
Oh, I have to imagine it did.
Because this has to be one of the first major, I guess, crimes committed against a celebrity. Very scary. Someone just walks up to you.
Yeah, I mean, It's terrifying.
Okay, so almost 6 hours later, shortly before 11 p.m., John Lennon and Yoko Ono returned to the Dakota, and they left their limo and stepped out onto the curb, basically. The two walked toward the entrance, and Chapman was still there. As Lennon walked through the door to the building, Chapman pulled out a .38 caliber handgun and fired it 5 times at John Lennon, hitting him 4 times. Lennon stumbled into the building, entering the office of the doorman. Yoko screaming, "John's been shot, John's been shot." The doorman triggered an alarm and watched in horror as John Lennon fell onto the floor of the office, bleeding profusely, his life swiftly slipping away. The doorman called 911 and asked for help to be sent urgently. Yoko and the doorman watched John Lennon die. Outside, Chapman dropped his gun on the sidewalk and calmly walked to the curb. He began reading his copy of The Catcher in the Rye. Police arrived and decided they could not wait for an ambulance. 2 officers carried Lennon to a squad car as other officers arrived on the scene. Lennon was pronounced dead at 11:07 p.m., but doctors later said that there had been no chance of saving him. His wounds were so severe that he was dead around the time of the 911 call. Chapman was taken into custody. So many Americans would learn of Lennon's death when Howard Cosell broke the news during Monday Night Football. As the New England Patriots prepared for a field goal in a game against Miami, Howard Cosell said, quote, "An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Hard to go back to the game after that news flash." He made a similar announcement a little later in the game. And Cosell was right. Lennon was well known and his fame in America was undeniable. Not only was his work with the Beatles popular, but he had some recent recordings that he'd been doing as well.
Now, maybe John, maybe more stars around him, I'm not actually digging this for my own curiosity, were more conscious about security and just being accessible to the public like that. But maybe John, is kind of pretty crunchy groove, right? So maybe he intentionally left himself open up to the public.
That's a possibility, although at the time I really don't think celebrities were armed to the gills with security.
Well, I mean, you've talked about this back in the day, be it 80s, 70s, 60s. Everyone seemed to be much more. All your stars, they didn't have to be perfect and polished. They just seemed like regular people, which I think makes a lot of the work they did very relatable.
He was only 40 years old, and he had recently released a much-anticipated album of new music. He was a resident of New York City and was often seen in and around town while the other Beatles all still lived in England. Trying to summarize or explain Lennon's importance to music would be impossible and unnecessary here. I'm not a huge John Lennon fan. I think the Beatles are pretty mid. I know there are people out there probably screaming at me right now.
No.
Why? How?
Maxwell Silverhammer.
No, I mean, I'm a music person for sure, but I've just never really gotten into the Beatles. I think they have a handful of songs that are pretty decent, but for the most part, they just don't do it for me.
Well, yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah, but I mean, it is, you can't say that the Beatles didn't have any effect on popular music. I mean, they're,
right. Yeah, like them or not.
They're one of the bands.
They definitely had a huge influence on music. And, I feel kind of the same way about the Grateful Dead. There's a few Grateful Dead tracks that are pretty groovy. But, I probably wouldn't follow them around the country and see them 50 times in a row.
I'm not a jam band person. I don't need to hear like a 30-minute song. I think if you're into psychedelics, right, then that might be why you enjoy a 30-minute song. I don't know.
I do think
I'm not into that scene. I'm not into those kinds of drugs, and I'm not into that kind of music, and therefore it's not my thing. But a lot of people are into it, and you can't live in Asheville area without throwing a rock and hitting a jam band.
No, jam bands with their 40-minute instrumentals. I mean, sometimes those can be very very enjoyable.
Yeah. There's even a Grateful Dead cover band.
But I've
been lucky enough to never catch them out and about. But
I do think you have to be on certain wavelengths for the jam band.
So the real mystery, Dylan, was who was Mark David Chapman and why did he kill John Lennon? So let's talk a bit about Chapman. His father was in the military, and as a result, he moved around a lot growing up. He had been born in Texas. He went to high school in Georgia. He achieved poor grades and later claimed he was the victim of bullying. He tried college but dropped out and ended up working as a security guard. During a bout of depression, he moved to Hawaii. I wish I had that option.
I think that would help my depression.
I think it would cure my depression altogether.
Yeah.
In June of 1979, he married, but the marriage did not fix his problems. He attempted suicide and also began drinking. He confided in friends that he felt he was going nuts. And then he became obsessed with the book The Catcher in the Rye. He began signing letters Holden Caulfield after the book's protagonist. He also became fixated on John Lennon for some reason. And of course, John Lennon famously lived in New York City and had been occasionally spotted out in the streets. So in October of 1980, Chapman traveled to New York City and upon his return, told his wife he was going to kill Lennon. Despite showing her the gun and some bullets he had, she didn't really believe him. Therefore, she didn't take steps to warn anyone.
Yeah, but I mean, you may just think he's funning or, being overly dramatic in some form. But I think if someone showed me a gun and bullets and claimed they had intention to kill anyone, let alone some famous person like Lennon, I'd be concerned. I would think.
So if
Wouldn't
a
you?
stranger was like, "Hey, I've got a gun. I'm going to go after Christina Aguilera," you would believe it?
Yeah.
You wouldn't just be like, "Wow, this person's a nut,"
No, well, I'm just saying we got to protect Christine away from this crazy person.
because you're a genie in the bottle.
Because I want more Genie in the Bottle. I want Genie in the Bottle 2023 remix.
Dylan likes to be rubbed the right way as well.
I'm a genie in
Well,
the bottle.
one of the
baby.
reasons, like, his wife really didn't believe him, and also she thought he was getting treatment for his mental illness. So she thought, okay, this is just something that he's saying, and he'll address this with a doctor.
Yeah, you just tell your therapist in the next session, honey.
In December of 1980, Chapman again traveled to New York City. He spent 3 days hanging around the front of the Dakota. The doorman even became aware of him but considered him harmless. At one point, the doorman saw a homeless person, asked Chapman for some money, and Chapman gave him $10. Sometimes Chapman wandered away. On December 7th, Chapman cornered the musician James Taylor in a subway station and began talking to him. However, Taylor found the confrontation off-putting, but not so terribly out of the ordinary, considering how he often encountered people on the street who recognized him and wanted to talk to him. I mean, again, he's pretty famous, James
Right.
Taylor. Chapman appeared to be rambling, and Taylor would later tell authorities that Chapman had said he was planning on talking to John Lennon as well. Taylor got away from Chapman and chalked it up to just another bad encounter with a weirdo member of the public.
Yeah, like an overly zealous fan of
Yeah.
some sort.
So the next day, Chapman would wait outside the Dakota all day, getting Lennon's autograph at one point, and then killing him that evening.
See, that's messed up. You know, John even took a minute and obliged him to sign the record, the LP, and it still didn't slow him down one bit in wanting to end his life for whatever reason.
Well, news of Lennon's murder shocked America, particularly those who grew up listening to the Beatles. Lennon's album, Double Fantasy, had been released only a couple of weeks earlier. It neared the top 10 of the music charts, but sales skyrocketed upon the news. It would hold the #1 spot on the album charts for 8 weeks in the United States, and it had a similar success overseas. It would win the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1989. People began gathering out of in front of the Dakota that evening, and a crowd even gathered outside the hospital, which was Roosevelt Hospital, where Lennon had been taken. Of course, there were tons of reporters. They shot photos and videos of onlookers, many of the fans crying, seeming confused by the events of the day. The crowd spontaneously began singing the chorus of one of Lennon's songs in unison. All we are saying is give peace a chance.
Oh,
It was poignant, for Lennon was a well-known pacifist, and his violent death seemed to indicate something horribly wrong in the universe for a lot of people.
well, it's unfortunate. You know, Chapman, if he ever got any help, certainly didn't get enough help. And, he gave in to his psychosis, and there's no telling what he was going through his mind when he shot Lennon.
Chapman cooperated with the police and gave them a statement that night in which he admitted he had shot John Lennon, but did not give any good reason for doing so. He told them that part of him was Holden Caulfield and the other part of him was the devil.
Whoa.
Medical authorities examined Chapman and determined whether or not he was competent to stand trial. They diagnosed him, or I guess sort of determined that he was delusional but not insane. So he was charged with murder. A court-appointed attorney entered a not guilty plea by reason of insanity and prepared to defend Chapman on those grounds. After several psychiatrists and others had examined him, Chapman decided to plead guilty. His attorney argued to the court that if he was truly insane, his guilty plea should not be accepted by the court. The court listened to arguments from all sides and then determined that Chapman was mentally sound enough to enter the plea, and they accepted it.
That's interesting. So you find someone is, in your opinion, delusional, but competent. That's kind of conflicting ideas, I think. Don't you?
Well, I think people can have certain delusions or maybe paranoia, but they're still aware of right and wrong. And
yeah,
they
okay.
still
Well, yeah.
know that, I shouldn't have shot this person. It's wrong.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Look, Dylan, there are people with far more education and experience making these determinations than you and me sitting here.
But I think my opinion should matter more. I think, is that me being delusional?
Look, we're sitting here with our like uncombed hair
Yeah.
and our sweatpants. I don't think we're professionals. We don't know. While he had been awaiting trial, Chapman had sent a note to the New York Times telling them to encourage their readers to pick up a copy of The Catcher in the Rye.
I bet the guy who wrote The Catcher in the Rye is like, man, if y'all would just quit giving my book bad publicity. But they probably sell a lot of copies every time
Well,
it
J.D.
happens.
Salinger was a weirdo in his own right. We can talk about that later. At his sentencing, when asked if he had anything to say, Mark David Chapman, read a passage from the book to court. In the passage, it was the one where Caulfield describes thousands of children playing in a field of rye near the edge of a cliff and how he would have to stand guard at the edge to keep children from accidentally falling off the edge. He said, quote, "That's all I do all day. I just be the catcher in the rye and all."
Okay, that sounds like the most dangerous field of rye I've ever heard of. On the edge of a cliff. That's atypical for most fields.
I had no idea that life in the Midwest was so rough.
And I did not, yeah. And
I've heard of life in the fast lane, but have not heard of life in the rye field.
Life in the rye lane.
Surely make you lose your mind.
I'd be like, get away from the edge, honey. You go play in the middle of the rye.
Well, the judge sentenced Chapman to 20 years to life, although the maximum sentence was 25 to life. It seems unimportant. I guess at this point. The notoriety of the case guarantees that he will never be paroled. The court also ordered that he be given psychiatric treatment while incarcerated.
Well, I hope he has finally over the years, been able to get some help. I mean, what can you say? And I bet the other Beatles was wishing John would use Yoko like a Bond's date in a Bond movie as a human shield. Oh my gosh, we were watching old Bond movies the other night, and me and Heather were cracking up because A, they're not as good as I remember. Okay,
No.
they're pretty dated, which is okay. And B, Bond will not hesitate in the least to use a woman. The woman he
grabbed her as she was a human shield, bro.
and he just threw her in front of him, and she took like 4 rounds to the back, and he throws her body down and goes after the killer.
I started laughing. It was really funny.
Oh,
Maybe we
yes.
could review some Bond films, Dylan.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so for example, in 2022, Chapman was up for parole but was denied for the 12th time. I really don't foresee this guy getting out of prison. The court also ordered that he would be given psychiatric treatment while incarcerated. So the Dakota was originally designed as an apartment building, and it was built in a period between 1880 and 1884, so it is a historic building. The Dakota Apartments building was supposedly named after people remarked on the area where it was built. In the 1880s, that portion of New York City was so far away from the city's hub, it was considered by many to be in the wilderness.
Oh, like the Dakotas.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
The building is huge. When it was first constructed, it held 65 apartments in its 10 stories and was aimed at a wealthy clientele.
So, man, you own 5 apartments. You can't even use but one of them. I mean, what the hell?
Well, I guess if it's a co-op and you own part of the corporation, like maybe you're renting those out and getting...
Yeah,
I don't know.
Or they could be trying to have a bigger footprint as far as running the corporation, the direction of the corporation. So I buy more apartments.
They
I have more.
Torn down the walls and they just have a big ass the whole floor or something.
Just seems like a lot.
The apartments varied wildly in layout and size, and it was also said that no two were alike. The smallest had only 4 rooms, while the largest had 20.
My goodness.
The building had its own power plant and central heating, both quite unusual for the 1800s. The apartments were all spoken for before construction was completed. And since its opening, the Dakota has been known for being a desirable address. Some of the most famous people who've lived there, it's a pretty robust list. I mean, very famous people, Dylan. We have actors and actresses, including Lauren Bacall, Judy Garland, Boris Karloff, Lillian Gish from back in the day, Connie Chung, Maury Povich, because you know they're married, right?
They are.
Gilda Radner. The co-op board famously turned away Melanie Griffith and Antonio Banderas, along with Gene Simmons of the band Kiss, Billy Joel, and Carly Simon.
Damn, Carly got lumped in with all them.
Well, they got rejected, bro.
That's what I'm saying.
How could you turn away Billy Joel? He's like Mr. New York. The building has also shown up in a lot of movies. Rosemary's Baby, Vanilla Sky, that really weird Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah, that was Kubrick's last movie.
It was so bad.
There's a big conspiracy theory around that movie.
But without a doubt, it is the most famous as being home of John Lennon, where he was gunned down in 1980.
Well, how could it not be? I mean, that was a huge deal.
The Dakota is privately owned, but visible from the sidewalk and street. It sits on the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West. And again, it is, I guess, a very popular tourist destination. Fans of John Lennon, the Beatles, people who like morbid tourism like we do, flock to the spot, get their selfies, take the photos, that kind of thing.
Gosh, I bet the nobles staring down out of the windows of the Dakotas at the peasants that gather on the sidewalk where their leader was killed. They probably get tired of it, having to see regular people down there.
How dare these little people just infiltrate our sidewalks?
Can we just purchase the rest of the city, mother?
Okay.
That's my sidewalk. You need to get off it.
Dylan, do you want to hear about another famous murder?
You know I do.
Okay. On the day after Christmas 1996, James E. Webb sat in the upstairs office of the General Wayne Inn working on books for the restaurant and hotel business that he ran with his partner, Guy Sileo Jr. Business was not good. They needed to call Gordon Ramsay to come in and fix this hotel.
Oh, so it's like Hotel Hell.
Yeah.
I love those shows. I love
Right?
that show, dude.
The two were having trouble paying their bills because revenue in the business was down by over $500,000 from what they had projected for the year.
And that is not good.
Yeah.
That's called being in the red.
Well, the General Wayne Inn had been operating as a business in this location continuously since 1704, making it one of the longest running commercial enterprises in the United States.
Wow,
So quite historic.
That's amazing.
It was a miracle that the 3-story building even stood this many years later. In its life, it had played host to the great and famous, people like George Washington and General Lafayette, Benjamin Franklin, Edgar Allan Poe, and General Mad Anthony Wayne, for whom it was named.
Can you imagine them reading a list of celebrities nowadays staying in a place? It would
I
not
think
be.
our hometown, I think our town here is named after Mad Anthony.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we even have a bar in town called Mad Anthony's.
That's true.
I'm pretty sure that our name is derived from this person.
But in the modern day, they would be like such famous greats like Justin Bieber. Yeah. And the Pussycat Dolls.
Okay. Wayne had served his country well, including a major supporting role at Valley Forge with George Washington. Of course, countless others had passed through the inn, and many said that some stayed behind in the form of ghosts.
No.
Particularly noteworthy were the Hessians, mercenaries hired by the British to fight the colonists during the American Revolution, who were said to haunt the place for centuries after they had died in the area.
Well, the Hessians sound scary.
Well, remember, the Hessian is the one in the Sleepy Hollow.
Okay.
He's the headless horseman.
So these
At
are
least in the Johnny Depp movie.
these are olden time soldiers of fortune. They will represent anyone who has the coin in their pocket.
I want to be a mercenary. I want to be a soldier of fortune.
I wonder if you can go on the dark web and get hooked up with a crew and go somewhere and do some soldier of fortune shit.
I'll play on anybody's team if they're paying me enough.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
As Webb studied the numbers for the inn, someone entered the office quietly and placed a gun against the back of his head. A moment later, he was dead from a single gunshot wound. His body fell backward onto the floor of the office. The wound was so small, it was almost undetectable. But once police realized that he'd been shot, they focused their attention on his business partner. The two men had taken out life insurance policies on each other. If one of them died, the insurance proceeds would more than make up for the bad year they had suffered at the General Wayne Inn. The survivor could make a go of it as a sole proprietor with this type of money.
So he had a lot to gain. If either partner dies, the other partner had a lot to gain.
The General Wayne Inn, without question, Dylan, is the oldest murder house in America, even though the one documented murder took place in 1996. But considering that this place has been standing since 1704, makes it the oldest murder house
That's pretty amazing.
which is kind of cool. So as I mentioned, it was built in 1704 in Merion, Pennsylvania, less than 10 miles from Philadelphia. A colonist named Robert Jones built the inn on land he bought for 20 shillings. The man he'd bought the land from had gotten a title to it from William Penn.
Oh, my gosh.
The first owner of the property named it the Wayside Inn, but it went through a series of name changes as time went by. After Jones died, the inn was run by a man named Anthony Tunis, and he named it the Tunis Ordinary.
Oh, that's a great name.
At other times, it was known as the William Penn Inn for the original owner of the land, the Streeper's Tavern for Abraham Streeper, who was the owner in 1776. Streeper left the inn in the hands of his wife while he went off to fight the British. During the Revolutionary War, while the owner was off fighting, the inn saw a bit of action of its own. The inn had many important visitors and ended up in enemy hands for a while. General Wayne stopped by, and George Washington and General Lafayette visited the inn the day after Wayne was there. Just a few days later, members of the Continental Congress stopped in as they fled the advancing British. Shortly after they left, the Redcoats rode into town and occupied Streeper's Tavern. Skirmishes took place around the inn, and this is where some of the ghost stories originate. Some Hessian soldiers were said to have died there or nearby. As with many ghost stories, details of the deaths are kind of hard to nail down.
Right.
But you got the local legends.
Man, you have all that
endure.
All that fighting all around a wood structure like this. It's a thousand wonders it survived, because, it seemed to be the favorite pastime of soldiers on both sides, set everything inside on fire.
It's true.
I mean,
It's true.
really, salt the earth.
After the Revolutionary War ended, General Wayne spent some time fighting Native Americans in the Northwest Territory. After his time out west, he traveled back to Merion and stopped at the inn. It was 1795, and while General Wayne was basking in the glow of his campaign's recent successes, the proprietor decided to name the inn after Wayne. So General Wayne, if you don't know who he was born in 1745, 41 years after the inn first opened, and fought in the American Revolution. His career was so illustrious that he is remembered today by many things that are named after him. So we got towns. I'm pretty sure Waynesville, where we live, is named after General Wayne. You've got forts, buildings, bridges. There's a Fort Wayne, Indiana. There's an actual Fort Wayne in Detroit. Detroit itself is Wayne County.
So
there's another General Wayne Inn in New York, about 100 miles away from the one in Pennsylvania.
So it seems like they had all these places, and they were just like, let's just name it after Wayne, that old general. Let's just call it Wayne's Place. I would name that inn the oldest murder house in the New World.
Fuck yeah. Many people wonder if General Wayne was insane. After all, they called him Mad Anthony, but it turns out that the nickname was a reference to his famous temper. He notoriously got mad at people who were incompetent and didn't follow orders.
Oh my God, he sounds like my wife.
I was going to say, you can start calling me Mad Heather.
Oh shit, I'm going to call you Heather Wayne.
Thanks. The inn always appeared to be prosperous. So over the years, it even housed a post office and a general store at one time or another. But its primary role has always been as a tavern and inn. In 1843, Edgar Allan Poe was said to have carved his initials in either a window or a windowsill at the tavern.
Well, he sat somberly and thought up scary stories.
The General Wayne Inn, or the Wayne, as regulars call it, was still hugely successful into the 20th century. Patrons packed the bar, and the restaurant was filled with customers and cigarette smoke, back when you could still smoke.
Oh, man, that was so terrible. That was really so terrible.
Gosh, I remember as a kid on Friday nights going to like the steakhouse with my grandparents to eat, and there was like the smoking section. And it would just be like a thick layer of smoke. And it's like all the older people in there smoking and eating, and they got like their ashen over their sirloin tips.
It's so gross. I'm a smoker, as I'm sure people will know.
People who smoke and eat like kind of at the same time is a thing. And it's so strange to me. Like, how can you do both?
It's just smoking indoors like that. I just don't even know how we ever did it or why you would do it. It's really gross. And it always tickled me. Even as a child, I would be like, this is ridiculous. The smoking section would just be 20 foot over here, and then the non-smoking section, but then like all the smoke's everywhere.
It's true.
I mean, it's just gross.
I just remember people sitting, and I would watch them as a kid and think, how can you do that? They would have a cigarette in their hand and be like cutting a piece of meat, like a steak, and
Really?
be like smoking and then like chewing on their beef tips and then taking another puff.
Why would you want to do that?
I don't know, but I remember watching people do this
That's so gross.
and being amazed by it as a kid.
Their ability to pull this off.
Yes.
Yeah. And why would they even do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in 1970, a man named Barton Johnson bought the General Wayne, the Fort Wayne Inn. The General Wayne Inn.
The Wayne. Hey, we call it the Wayne. The people who know. If you know, you know. You know. If you know, you know. It's the Wayne down there.
So people that are familiar with the inn kind of remember his ownership for two reasons. The first one is that the inn was a pretty big moneymaker during this period, and Johnson loved to tell people that the inn was haunted.
Ah, that's a good branding.
So by the late 1980s, the story was so well known that the TV series Unsolved Mysteries ran an episode about it, trying to track down ghosts of the Hessian soldiers.
I would love to hear Robert Stack talk about that.
Later, the inn would appear again on America's Most Wanted when they ran a piece on the Webb murder. So in 1995, the General Wayne was purchased by James E. Webb and Guy Sileo Jr. for a little under $1.3 million. They borrowed almost all of it from banks and used a $100,000 gift from Sileo's father as a down payment. Webb would be the executive chef and Sileo would be the sous chef. They hired a talented young chef named Felicia Moist to work for them. Webb and Sileo had worked together before. They ran a successful restaurant nearby. When they bought it, the inn was known for hosting big band dances and for its old-fashioned menu. So I wonder what that means, like Oysters Rockefeller?
Your old-fashioned, outdated menu, you're known for it. Yes. Get all the comfort foods.
They're like serving you a rustic goose or something.
Oh, a rustic goose?
Some Cornish game hens. I don't know. I'm trying to think of an old-fashioned menu. What are they going to serve?
A little gamey hen be like, yeah, you want to eat meat? Come on, man.
This is the same gruel we served during the Viking Age.
Yes, it's a storied recipe.
They hoped they could update the menu and atmosphere of the General Wayne Inn, but for some reason, the updated menu didn't translate into success at the General Wayne. The old-time customers were scared off by this new cuisine, and the younger crowd didn't really get the message that the 18th century inn was now sort of like a hip and modern place to be.
What, no blood sausage? No bangers and mash?
The business began losing money almost immediately, and the partners had spent a ton remodeling the building, and everything in it was considered collateral on the loan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they were definitely in some financial straits.
So they're going to lose it all, literally.
Sales were decreasing steadily in 1996, and the writing was on the wall, Dylan. The restaurant was not going to survive. And while Webb kind of seemed to know this, his partner, Sileo, did not. The two argued about the direction the business was headed. Webb wanted to leave Sileo in the inn and kind of start his own restaurant. Sileo started drinking while at work and was engaged in a relationship with a younger employee. Webb told Sileo he was going to have to leave the partnership after the holidays, and that is when Sileo became violent. The two actually came to blows in the days leading up to the murder.
Well, this is an easy investigation, wouldn't you think?
More troubling, Dylan, is that Sileo had approached his partner Webb and demanded that Webb sign a statement that the $100,000 gift from Sileo's father had been a loan, not a gift. It was an odd request previously. Sileo had given documentation to creditors that the money had been a gift. So Webb was like, why this change of heart? So the part of the issue was that if the money was a gift, it could not be recovered in a bankruptcy proceeding. So the bankruptcy estate would have no assets on Christmas Day, 1996. The inn was insolvent. But if one of the men died, there would be a $650,000 life insurance policy. I will eventually learn to speak English, which they would be able to use to sort of
We could basically
start over or invest.
Yeah, you could basically square most of the debt, the crippling debt certainly of the business, and you'd even have maybe a little left over to maybe head in a new direction.
So that's kind of how it came to be that Webb was staring at these red line accounting ledgers
I don't
on
know.
the day he was shot in the head.
I don't know what I'm going to do about this. Maybe he was planning on killing his partner, but then his partner killed him before he could get him killed.
So the morning after Webb was shot, the inn's pastry chef arrived for work and saw Webb's truck in the parking lot. Assuming that he was just there doing some office work, maybe a bit early before things started, she went about her business. A few minutes after she arrived, Sileo arrived, and the chef told him that Webb was in the office, but she hadn't spoken with him yet. Sileo went upstairs and returned shortly later to tell her that Webb was dead in the office. The pastry chef went upstairs and looked in, but thought that he had just maybe fallen back and hit his head. Later that day, Sileo told Webb's wife that her husband had been shot, even though everyone who had seen the body initially thought that he had just simply fallen and hit his head. Because again, it was a really tiny...
Yeah, sound like a very small caliber weapon. Even the gunshot itself didn't seem to alarm anyone. Yeah, and so that's one of those Freudian slips or trip-ups that people do because they know what happened. It's like when the cops come and tell you that, let's say for hypothetically, cops come and say, Heather's dead, your wife. And if I what's the normal reaction to that? Even though people grieve and take this type of news in all kinds of different ways, is what happened. That's going to be your next question. What happened to her? What happened? Why is she dead? What happened? If you're not asking that question, that's going to make somebody suspicious, right?
Well, the police investigated, and their first, most obvious suspect is Sileo. But he has an alibi. The young chef, Felicia. Bye, Felicia.
Isn't her Felicia Moist?
Moist.
Moist?
Yeah.
Moist.
So the young chef Felicia told investigators that she was with Sileo at the time of the shooting. The police continued their investigation, looking for other possibilities. All evidence kept pointing back to this business partner, Sileo. Law enforcement discovered that he owned a gun that was the same caliber as the murder weapon, but it was tested and it was not connected to the crime.
Really?
Witnesses, however, told police that Sileo had said, quote, "I really feel like I need to shoot someone more than once in recent weeks." A bartender from another restaurant that Sileo had frequented told police that Sileo had once asked about extradition laws and wondered if the bartender knew any good countries where he could, quote, hide out if he wanted to kill somebody.
Okay.
He had asked this question about a month before Webb was killed.
These are
So,
great.
Dylan, do you know any good countries where I can just go hang out if I kill somebody?
I'm not sure, but I think most of them that don't extradite to America or have any kind of agreement with America are pretty rough countries, little tiny countries.
You'd probably just be better off in prison here, is what you're saying?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
These people are so dumb.
What
You
I would
are
do
so dumb.
is I would go over to Russia. Oh, you're so dumb. I would go to Russia with marijuana in my luggage, and then I would trick the Russians into put me in jail because I broke their very strict.
What if they put you at, was it the Black Dolphin?
Yeah.
Isn't that the jail that's
Oh my God.
the prison that's like so horrible?
Yeah, it's horrible. It's the one where they lead you around like with your arms jacked up in there, and two guys are holding you an arm under each arm with you like retched forward where you're looking straight down, hunched over, and then there's a third guy behind him with a huge like cartoonishly big mallet that looks like something out of the Looney Tunes, holding it at the ready to smash you in the head if you make one false move. Yeah. So I tricked the Russian authorities and put me in jail because I violated their very strict drug policies. And then boom, America can't get me. Russia ain't fucking with America, bud.
Black Dolphin.
You see how smart this international criminal is?
This is like a 60 Days In episode.
Yeah, and
Dylan.
then they could trade the butcher of Bakersfield for me or some shit. Yeah.
Nice reference.
Thanks.
Now, a grand jury convened and Silo was called to testify. He swore that he owned only the gun of that caliber, but he had never shot anybody with it. Never, ever shot this gun. Later, a police wiretap caught Sileo telling someone, in fact, he owned 2 guns of that caliber.
Haha.
Sileo was tried and convicted of perjury and false swearing. At that point, the state decided to prosecute Sileo for the murder of Webb.
False swearing. It was like, he swore. He swore on it.
The case had also provided for some other drama. One of the reasons that Sileo and Webb had fought was over the inappropriate relationship Sileo, who was married, was having with the employee of the inn. So not only was there a financial problem, but there was this issue.
He was trolling the sausage around.
When he was first questioned by the police regarding his whereabouts on the night of the murder, Sileo said he was with Felicia, the chef from the inn. But as the investigation focused more on Sileo, Felicia Moyse was Sileo's lifeline. And on February 24th of 1997, she shot herself in the head with a handgun belonging to her father in her parents' bedroom.
Oh, my gosh.
Felicia Moyse was Sileo's only alibi witness.
Yeah, I don't know how solid I would even think his alibi is at all, especially if I figure out they're having some kind of a relationship.
Sileo was prosecuted for the murder of Webb, and on August 1st of 2001, he was convicted of first-degree murder. During the trial, it was revealed that when Webb was murdered, the life insurance company had paid the $650,000 from the policy taken on Webb's life in favor of the business. $433,303 of it was used to pay off a small business loan, and the remainder was placed into escrow, where it became the subject of bankruptcy proceedings that Sileo had initiated shortly after Webb's murder. If the bankruptcy court had accepted the argument that the gift from Sileo's father had really been a loan, then some of the money from the life insurance proceeds could have been given directly to Sileo's father for repayment of that.
Okay. So it would maybe been a way for him to give the money back to his father and maybe even have his father give it back to him. Or I don't know. Sounds like this guy has some really kooky ideas about finances.
Well, the General Wayne Inn traded hands several times after Webb's death. In 1999, the building sold for almost $1 million, but the new buyer had to invest another $200,000 in renovations. So the last restaurant venture on the site closed in 2002, and many people were starting to believe that the building was cursed, if not haunted, or maybe it's haunted and cursed. So the last person to operate the General Wayne Inn was a restaurant owner named Frank, and I know I'm not going to say that.
Oh, no, you've said all these words properly today. Give it to us.
Frank Cacciuti?
Cacciuti. I'm sure that's it. I'm sure.
Cacciuti.
The Cacciutis are known for operating restaurants.
Who had run a very successful restaurant before at a different location. But when he opened this one, it was abysmal. The business was it was dismal, man. Local papers didn't really want to run stories about the opening. It just kind of seemed like after having this murder,
nobody really wanted to go there and hang out.
Nobody wanted to go there. And then it's just sort of like a train. Everybody called it a train wreck. Just and kind of wanted to watch it fail almost.
Why do you think some of these places, like which we've talked about, every town has the little weird restaurant kind of out of the way that's been 50 different places. I think oftentimes it's location. I think that goes a long ways to affecting, even if you have a good restaurant, if it's hard to get in or out, if people don't see you, you're not going to get that foot traffic. But someplace historical, very old, kind of a complicated place like that, I would never, ever, as tough as restaurants are to keep afloat, period, because people are so finicky and the margins really are razor thin. And by the time you get done with labor and food costs, there's really, one mistake and it can ruin you. Why in the world would you think someone would think they could operate a business like this in this old historical place?
Well, maybe the
complicated history.
Well, maybe the draw of the complicated history is what would attract people there. I mean, I would go look at like the Lizzie Borden house.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been able to run a bed and breakfast and a business there for more than a century based on a murder that happened in the 1800s.
And they probably stay full.
You know they do.
You know they do. Yeah.
So if someone were to buy the General Wayne Inn and make it like a really haunted, like the Stanley Hotel, like a creepy destination,
Satan's cradle.
They might be able to get customers. I don't know.
You come on down here and the kitchen of death and get you some warm comfort food. We serve it family style now.
Well, Dylan, now the building is privately owned, but it can be seen from the road. So if you're ever in the area and want to catch a glimpse of America's oldest murder house,
yeah,
you can check it out.
We may have to do a drive-by.
Well, in 2003, an organization bought the property to convert it into the Chabad Center for Jewish Life. So no longer operating as a restaurant, it became a place of education and outreach. At the time, the selling price was reportedly around $650,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a deal.
So to convert it to use for an organization instead of a hotel, it sounds like the owners invested around $1 million in the building.
Okay.
But the exterior was not altered. The building contains 14,000 square feet and has a balcony on its second floor.
Damn, that's a pretty big building.
The name General Wayne Inn is still visible on the side of the building. So they have kind of kept it a little historic, I suppose.
Well, that's good.
Even though they've, converted or
To
whatever.
office space on the inside.
Yeah.
And a fellowship hall of some type. Or maybe like a hall where that people get together.
So the oldest murder house.
Well, look, here's the thing.
most oldest.
That's when it's a lot of extra. When it's most oldest.
It's the most really oldest house.
Okay, well, those were some very interesting murder houses or murder apartments, murder co-ops. Yeah?
Well, we've got the Dakota, which is a cooperative apartment building, Dylan.
People cooperate very well there in the Dakotas.
And then I guess that would be considered, it's an old murder house hotel, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's awesome.
Plus, I just thought that was really strange, and I had never heard of the General Wayne Inn.
No, I didn't know that General Wayne had so much influence all over the East Coast, it seemed.
He does.
Eastern part of
we live,
America.
We have that little local place near us that's Matt Anthony's.
We do
tap room.
Have a little local place near us that is indeed called Matt Anthony's.
And our whole town, I think, is named after her.
And we're in fucking Waynesville,
yeah,
y'all.
Exactly.
In the Big 8C. That's Haywood County for the uninitiated. All right. Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate your spooky little stories. You're really doing a good job of keeping it going this month, to soak up all the spooky times.
Well, Dylan, we love October and we love Halloween. I'm just trying to get everybody in the spooky mood.
I think you're doing a great job, Heather.
And if you're feeling froggy, guys, check out some of the excellent podcasts over at the Darkcast Network. We are part of the Darkcast Network, and it's just a great group of indie podcasters.
It really is.
All month long, meaning all the amazing shows on the Darkcast Network, are producing creepy content. There has been some really cool stuff coming out. Some of the best podcasts you're going to hear, Darkcast. You've got to check out Horrifying History.
You just got to go put it in your ear, y'all.
Weird True Crime.
That's the good stuff.
Misty Mysteries. They cover true crime and paranormal stuff. You've got the Burnt Marshmallows podcast.
I got to imagine that's some good, scary stories.
No, they are really putting out some great content for the month of October. So make sure you check out darkcastnetwork.com. And follow them on social media because there's so many good podcasts. And
if you would like to get a little bit more Mountain Murders in you, if you've not spent yet, you can go over to patreon.com/Mountain Murders podcast and find a ton of extra content.
It's true. We actually, we just dropped a brand new Patreon episode the other day, and we have a brand new one coming out today.
We have a lot of fun over there on the Patreon.
We'll be dropping a brand new Patreon today for our loyal followers there.
We certainly will, and I can't wait to see you there over on the Patreons. And if not, keep on listening. We love it when you tune in every week.
Whee!
Hey.
Okay.
And Heather's going to go continue to scare me.
Yay.
Yay.
Bye, Dylan.
Bye, Heather.